So does this go to 4 or do we want to try to end early?
Well, I would end the content about 3:50 so you can do questions, but the webinar can end at 4.
Okay.
Sounds good.
I might try to get us to questions a little earlier than that.
That's fine.
I think it's much better to just blow through it and then let questions. I was going to ask them to save the questions to the end.
That's fine.
That's fine. But yeah, we'll end the webinar at 4. So if you end before that, that's fine. But
Okay.
I'll just give it 1 more minute according to my computer's clock.
That's fine.
Finally, we have a sunny day here.
Oh yeah, we had sun yesterday and the day before, but now it's rainy. So
It's coming our way then. I swear the weather now comes up from you.
I think that's true, except for the winter when it comes down.
It just hits us from broadside.
Right. Looks like we have 19 people signed in. That's good.
It's good.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started, Nancy and Nancy.
Nancy and Nancy.
Okay.
Okay. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for NASH's TS3 webinar on the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement, or NSLVE. I'm Claire Jacobson, the Director of NASH's Taking Student Success to Scale High Impact Practices project. As a representative of the Chief Executive of the 46 colleges and university systems of public higher education in the United States, the National Association of System Heads, or NASH, harnesses the power of cross-system collaboration to increase student success in college, especially for low-income and underrepresented minority students. In 2014, NASH launched its TS3 initiative, Taking Student Success to Scale. Collectively, TS3 is made up of 22 systems spanning more than 300 institutions in 17 states. These systems are working together on 3 evidence-based interventions: high-impact practices for all students, redesigning the math pathway, and guided pathways using predictive analytics. Today's webinar will discuss how campuses and systems can use the NSLVE as part of their citizenship education missions. The NSLVE examines student voting rates, patterns, and conditions. Through this, colleges and universities receive reports detailing their students' aggregate voting rates following each federal election. Today, first, Nancy Shapiro, the Associate Vice Chancellor for Education and Outreach at the University System of Maryland, will discuss how her system has engaged with the survey. Nancy Shapiro will then introduce Nancy Thomas, who directs the Institute for Democracy and Higher Education at Tufts University's Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life. Nancy Shapiro directs the University System of Maryland's P20 partnership efforts, developing collaborations that foster critical partnerships in learning communities to improve the quality of teaching and learning for Maryland's teachers and students from kindergarten through college. She is also actively involved with NASH's TS3's Redesigning the Math Pathway initiative. Just a few housekeeping items before I turn it over to Nancy Shapiro. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be circulated within the next 2 weeks. It will also be available on our website. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them into the chat box. Now, Nancy Shapiro.
Thank you very much, Claire. And good afternoon, everyone. As we get started with today's webinar, I wanted to offer a couple of data points for context. So you may or may not know that in 2007, the United States ranked 139th in voter participation of 172 world democracies. In 2010, only 10% of US citizens contacted a public official. And less than half of all 12th graders in the United States study international topics as part of their civics education. So why should systems care about this? Why is it a system concern? Well, I suggested this topic to Rebecca Martin as we were thinking about what the role of NASH could be in, and not just the work of the TS3, but broadly, how do you engage systems in conversations around the role of public higher education in the United States. In 2017, the University System of Maryland launched a civic education and Educating for Democracy initiative. It got started because the Board of Regents took a look at the nation as a whole and the role of higher education, and educating for citizenship is a big part of the sort of a key mission of public higher education. So that was sort of on their screen. But in addition to that, the regents had already endorsed civic education and citizenship education as a big part of the USM strategic plan over the next 10 years. And so with those two things in mind, the Board of Regents identified a working group in 2017, and I helped facilitate that group from across the system. And we came up with 3 categories of recommendations around that work. And I'm happy to follow up with anybody about the larger report that we made and the multiple set of recommendations and what's happening with those since we made those recommendations. But the 3 categories were voter engagement and voting, encouraging our campuses to participate in the Carnegie classification of an engaged university, and curricular integration. How can we help faculty integrate the idea of citizenship and educating for democracy into all of the classes across the curriculum? So today's webinar is really a discussion of how we're addressing the first area of recommendation. And so I'm going to be turning this over to Nancy Thomas, because when I first got involved with this work, I contacted Nancy. It turns out that many of our institutions at the University System of Maryland were already signed up with the NSLV group, the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement, but not all of them were. So Nancy's been very helpful to me in bringing on all of our campuses into the work of NSLV. And by being a whole system that's engaged in this work, we get some additional information and additional useful perks around the research that she's doing. And I wanted to, so when I talked to Rebecca, I said, you know, there's so much going on in Maryland around this topic, and I can imagine that other institutions and other systems are curious. So I'd like to sort of offer Nancy as a good resource for other systems. So that's what we're doing today. So as Claire said, Nancy directs the Institute for Democracy and Higher Education at Tufts University, University's Jonathan Tisch School of Civic Life, College of Civic Life. The IDHE is an applied research center and studies, as she says, all things political on college campuses, including civic learning, political discourse, political equity, engagement in democracy, and particularly voting. The Institute's signature initiative is NSLV, the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement. And as Claire said, it examines student voting rates, patterns, and conditions. Through NSLV, nearly 1,100 US colleges and universities receive tailored reports containing their students' aggregate voting rates, and they follow every election. Each of those campuses has been involved through their state systems. So today we're going to take a closer look at NSLV, how it works, where the data comes from, which campuses are involved, and what these campuses and systems receive in exchange for participation, and essentially why educating for health and future of democracy is so essential. So Nancy, I'm turning it over to you now.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nancy Shapiro. We're a good team, the 2 Nancys. So as Nancy Shapiro said, we study all things political. We're a really nice small shop at Tufts University. It's a research institute, but we are what we call an applied research institute, meaning we don't just study something, we study something in an effort to make change. and to provide you with resources and sort of usable data, if you will. We think that voting shouldn't be in a vacuum. We think that it is all part of a bigger agenda involving learning and equity and discourse and even classroom teaching. And so while we look at voting, and that's one place where people are often turning to us for advice, we think that it's a little more complicated of a situation than that. So the first thing I wanted to share with you, and I should say thank you to all of you who signed up. When I looked at the sign-up sheet, I realized that it was a little bit of a mixture of people with systems, people on campuses that are not part of the voting study yet, and people who are on campuses that are part of the voting study already. And so maybe you just want to hear a little bit more about it. So I'm going to kind of go through this quickly and in a broad way, but then there will be time for questions and answers at the end. Okay, so what's NSLV? First of all, we are nonpartisan. Second of all, we're objective. Now, by that, what do I mean? Well, most voting, you see reports, 53% of the population voted in the 2018 election. Well, that's usually based on survey responses or exit polls. And in our case, that's not how we do it. We actually marry actual voting records with actual enrollment records, and I'll explain the process in a little bit. But that makes it a very accurate project. We work on federal elections. I wish we could do the odd election here or there, or the November odd-numbered elections, but we just don't have that kind of financing. And that's because the service is free. We try to keep it free to everybody. We want all campuses to participate. And then in exchange for signing up, you will get a report, which I'll also go through in a little bit, but we also get a great database. And we are the envy of the world because we have a database right now of 10 million college student records, 10.7 million to be accurate, and that's more than half of the college students in the United States. Who participates? We have 1,100 degree granting, sorry about the train in the background, accredited institutions. We can only work with institutions that provide data to the National Student Clearinghouse, which I'll also explain in a minute, but that's most of you. 96% of all colleges and universities in the country participate with the clearinghouse. We have representation of all states. We have 13 systems and several more in the works. And we work with every institutional type, whether it's a Research One university, a community college, etc. Okay, so how does it work? All right, so you all are at your colleges over on the left side, and you provide enrollment lists every semester to the National Student Clearinghouse. The Clearinghouse was formed in the early 1990s as a way for campuses to avoid endless amounts of questions from banks, asking, could we collect on Nancy's student loan? So the deal is you wait 9 months and then the banks can start collecting, and they were calling up the schools and saying, has Nancy graduated? And the school would say, well, yes, Nancy graduated. And then the school would say, well, is she still in school? And they'd say, we don't know. And this became such a mess that they all came up with an agreement that everybody would submit data, their enrollment records, up to the semester to the clearinghouse. And in exchange, the clearinghouse would field these endless questions about whether they could collect on loans. Over time, that task has expanded. The clearinghouse now answers questions about for employment. So did this person actually get a degree, and in what field? And as a result, the clearinghouse has lots and lots of really rich data that goes back 20 years. So it's really a stunning database. The clearinghouse will partner with other research entities with permission. This is an opt-in project. You cannot join NSLV just by saying, hey, we want our report. You have to fill out a form. We then purchase voting records. We happen to buy them from a company called Catalyst. There are other vendors that collect voting records. I can tell you horror stories about how difficult it is to collect voting records in 50 states in this country because every single state has different rules. And it takes many, many months for Catalyst to come up with them. Catalyst is one of the many vendors that collects these records, but they are a vendor that academics use for research. And a lot of academics have actually studied the Catalyst database for accuracy, and that's why we picked them. They make their voting records available for academic research. In our case, all we're getting is the public voting record. So anything that you would go over to a Secretary of State's office or a local district and look up is what we get from the Catalyst data. Those two records are married, then the clearinghouse removes from the records anything that would allow us to identify your students. So we do not get names, we do not get birth dates, we get age on the date of the election, we do not get addresses, we get zip codes. If there is a unit in the data that we get, so for example, we get field of study, if you have under 10 students pursuing a given field, we don't get it. We get an NA, not available. We then add other databases such as IPEDS, which is the federal government system that collects institution level data, and we do the analysis, and then we send you these gorgeous reports. And so that's why that arrow is at the bottom on what you get, why the data comes right back to you. All right, so this is page 3 of a report. And for those of you who have already seen it, bear with me, but a report contains your students' registration rates. So we know how many students are at your school because we have the numbers from the clearinghouse. We know how many registered because we have the numbers from Catalyst, and then we do the math for you. In this case, you're looking at a sample 2-year campus, comparing the 2012 and the 2016 data. 2018 data is not available yet because not all of the states have certified their voting records, and we are chomping at the bit. We're waiting, and we're all a little bit impatient, but there's not much we can do about it. When we get the data for 2018, the report that you will be sent will be just like this, only it will compare 2014 and 2018 data. We then tell you the percent of your students that were registered to vote and also voted. That is not your so-called turnout rate. That is simply the voting rate of those who registered, and those numbers tend to be a little bit higher. And then we provide you with a voting rate, and as you can see for this particular institution, it was 45.9 or 46%. We then provide you with comparisons for all of the institutions in our study, in NSLV. We calculate a change rate. There are lots of things that we do here. On that same page, we give you your raw numbers. So if you were to look at these numbers and say, hey, this doesn't look right, we actually give them to you so you could redo the math. And one of the reasons why we do that is we have no capacity to pull out international students. There is a way for you all to flag them to the clearinghouse, but right now only about 4% of the students who are international are actually flagged. So it doesn't do us any good. If you get more involved in the study, I hope they will consider putting a little checkbox next to those international, those non-citizens, so that we can give you an accurate number here. But for right now, this is the way we do it. And as I say, we then calculate these numbers and we give you little arrows. You went up, you went down, and we make it as easy as possible. We also tell you the population change on your campus. This is a typical page from a report. As you can see, this one happens to be about age. Look at this interesting number for 2012. The students in 2012 at this institution, which is a different institution, 50% of them voted, but look at the percentage point gain to 2016. That's almost 8 percentage points. I'll talk about the national averages in a second, but I can assure you that's pretty good. And then you look at the next number, look at how much lower the voting rate is for the older students than the younger students. So you have to ask what's going on there. Maybe this institution has a very robust study abroad program and lots of students are abroad junior year. Or maybe their undergraduates have already graduated and this is a much smaller number of students. You have to pick through the data, and as I say, we give you the raw numbers so that you can do that. This is one of our most popular pages in a report. This is a page showing how many students and what percentage of your students voted, broken down by field of study. So the winner at this particular institution, the winners are education and legal professions. That isn't surprising to me. The three top fields of study that vote are education, library sciences, and anything to do with law or legal studies. We also flagged for you some places where you might want to pay some attention. So for example, you've got a lot of generalists down there in liberal arts, and only 40% of them are voting. My guess is those are really young. Those are the younger students, and it takes some time to engage them, and that may explain that voting rate. But then if you look at things like computer sciences or communications, you might say, well, they're trailing behind 10 percentage points from our regular voting rates, and so we want to pay some attention to that. We also provide you with race, gender. We help you with comparisons to your Carnegie classification. I'm trying to think of the other categories. The reports are generally between 6 and 9 pages long, and you get back the data you give us. So if your institution doesn't provide data, like if you get a report and it's got a lot of missing pages and you're saying, wait a minute, where is field of study, or where is race and ethnicity? The reason we don't give it to you is because it is not provided to the clearinghouse. So whatever data you give to us to access, we use, and then we kick it back to you. We do a national report. I'm happy to send out this link and also to make these slides available so you can easily link to this. I just wanted to point out to you that from 2012 to 2016, and I know 2016 feels like ancient history, but Donald Trump was on the ballot with Hillary Clinton. There was a lot of action, particularly on college campuses, but around the United States, and yet look at what happened to the voting rate on campuses. It only went up 3 percentage points. But even more importantly, registration rates went up almost negligibly, 1.6 percentage points. So, and then what happened is the people who registered and voted turned out at higher percentage point gains. So what does that mean? That means that there weren't enough students that registered, and yet something happened after the date of registration and before the election to get people a little riled up. And I think if we think back, we can probably remember what was going on in October before the 2016 election. All right, so if I had access to you all, I would make you guess. This is a quiz. I would love to know if people have any idea what happened in the 2014 midterm. We all know that midterm elections, the voting rates are lower than the presidential elections, but nationally in our study, only 18% of all students, that's older students, younger students, graduate students, undergraduate students, turned out to vote in 2014. And check this out. For what we consider first-time voters, they're not all, you could be 28, you can be voting for the first time, but certainly 18 to 21-year-olds are probably first-time voters. They only voted at 12%. So what does that mean? That means that for everybody who lines up in a group of 10, probably only about 1 is voting. That was a shocker to a lot of campuses. We got many calls asking, is this a data error? We have campuses that voted in the single digits, but we also have some campuses that voted as high as 40% in 2014. And so we've got a portal on our website where you can go and you can play. If you just plug in NSLV 2014 data, you will get to this portal. Then what we do for systems is we provide what we call a system report. Now, this is an example of a parallel report. It happens to be for an association of campuses, the American Democracy Project. I didn't want to put up a systems report because there's so few campuses in systems, whereas ADP, it's 182 campuses, and so I didn't think they would mind. Plus, I know that they publish that data. But if you were a system, you would be getting a report from us that looks like this. And it would say how many campuses are in your system, and then we would assign you a comparison group. So if you are a system of community colleges, we'll compare you with that. If you are a system of state colleges and universities, we'll compare you with those. If you are one of the many systems now that are being merged, so the community colleges and state colleges and universities are together, then we will merge it as well. This is a typical page from these cluster reports, these system reports. And what we do, as I said, is we give you comparisons. So we tell you all of the NSLV institutions, we tell you your comparison group, which is in orange, and then we tell you, oh, this is where your system was. This happens to be a different report. So again, we break it down: voting rate, registration rate, and registered and voted. This is a different report, but it's also in every system report. These are really interesting because what this does is it breaks down the students in the system by race, ethnicity. And so these may be small numbers. You may not have a lot of one group of students, but if it doesn't matter, as long as it's 10 or more, we can report it. The colorful bars in the middle are your system. The gray boxes are average for this voting study. So as you can see, this particular system beat out the averages for all of the demographic groups except for Black students. And as you can see there, the Black students voted at rates lower than the average for NSLV campuses. You can also look at whether they went up and down. Remember, the voting rates went up 3 percentage points. So if you went down in a particular group, that might be something to think about. Here, if you don't see 2012, it's because we didn't have the data. I just want to share with you some of the other research that we're doing. We are looking at what we call positive and negative outliers. So for those of you who don't know, voting is extremely complicated. I will never in my lifetime be able to say to you, if you do this one thing, you will get your voting rates up. It's very complicated. There are voting conditions, there's the propensity of certain types of voters. You may have a lot of STEM majors which vote at lower rates, or you may have all education school majors which vote at higher rates. You might have older women and they vote at higher rates. So what we do is a regression model to identify the predictors of voting. And then behind the scenes, we calculate for each of you a predicted and an actual voting rate. We don't share that because modeling is always a little bit tricky, but for research purposes, it works wonderfully. And then what we do is we try to visit the campuses that are voting at rates just wildly higher than we predicted or wildly lower. And in 2014 to 2016, we visited 10 campuses. 7 were positive outliers, 2 were negative outliers, and 1 was right in the middle. But this year we are redoing this study with 13 other campuses around the country. What really stunned us was the consistency with the findings. These were qualitative studies. They were focus groups. We did not go in with any preconceived notions other than we thought that we would hear things about voting. In reality, we didn't hear that much about voting from a lot of the campuses. We did for some. And so what we heard were these 5 things. And we've got lots of reports out on this. I'm not going to go through them in any detail, but I'm happy to share with you any of the reports. These were the campuses with very high voting rates were campuses with a lot of social cohesion. There were very strong faculty-student relationships, strong student relationships, and lots of diversity. And so what was so stunning about these campuses was the way they handled interpersonal relationships across differences, not just differences in social identity, but also in political ideology. Our number 1 finding, what researchers might call our highest frequency code, had to do with political discussions. These were campuses, the high voting campuses were places where they talked politics all the time. talked it in the classroom, talked it in the dorms, talked it by the water coolers, lots and lots of very skilled political discussions. A lot of them were structured. A lot of the students had been trained. The faculty were trained in the arts of discussion-based teaching. It was really quite stunning. 4 of the 7 positive outliers had first-year experiences where they taught all of the students the arts of discussion, how to frame issues, how to talk about them, how to write about them, how to take different perspectives, how to discuss possible solutions to problems, how to present advocacy, and so forth. We also found that these were institutions that took student voice very seriously. I was interviewing a president in one campus, and a student protest erupted, and the president stopped the interview and said, "Sorry, I gotta go talk to the students." So they take students very seriously, and students are very involved in decision-making. Activism is not snuffed, if you will. It's highly considered. And then around elections, yes, we had some findings. Elections are fun. There's a buzz. And it's something we do around here. It's kind of a normative value. My friends do it. I take my friends to the polls. We make it almost a social activity. We have put out a report called Election Imperatives. I won't go through that, but it's also available, and it has all sorts of to-do things, what you to do to increase these 5 things that we found in our qualitative research. Okay, let's get to the serious part, which is signing up, and then I really will come up for air pretty soon. So what you need to do is you need to fill out a form. For systems, only 1 form is needed. For campuses, if you want to fill this out, only 1 form is needed. These forms, it's the same form. The clearinghouse will accept the form. The form is actually an addendum to the contract that the campus has with the clearinghouse. We aren't even a party to it. But in essence, what it says is, we, the campus, or we, the system, give the clearinghouse permission to match enrollment and voting records, de-identify them, and send them to IDHE at Tufts University. That's what it says. It's got all sorts of scary language about all the things that we get, and oh my gosh, my life is always full of lawyers. But in the end, we've got 1,100 colleges and universities that signed this form, and I can assure you it has been vetted by a lot of lawyers, more than I can imagine. So if you are signing up your system or your campus, we need somebody with signing authority. That can be on a campus, a president, an IR director, or a registrar, a vice president, a provost, somebody with signing authority. The clearinghouse will accept associate provosts. They will accept interim people. So if you've got an interim IR director, they will accept that. And at the system level, it would be the chancellor or president of the system. It would be the chief student affairs officer, something like that. If you sign up your system, you do not receive the campus reports. We view the reports to campuses as confidential. We do not disclose your data ever. We do not share it. When people ask us, oh, can I please have Tufts University's report, we say, you got to go find it, and we help them know which offices have the reports, but we do not make the decision to release them. And similarly, if you sign up your system, you will not get individual data for your campuses. What you will get, however, is one of those system reports that I went through. And that's a pretty cool thing to do. I will also, I'll attend conferences, or I'll get on webinars, I'll walk people through reports. We do a lot, we are everywhere, and trying to help people understand their reports and figure out some of the things that they might want to do with them.
I'm sorry, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Sorry I joined late, I had another meeting. So I'm from the University at Albany, SUNY. I'm wondering if these data will be longitudinal. Like, do you plan to collect these in various election cycles?
Right. So how I wish, right? No. In order to do longitudinal data studies, I would have to get individual permission from the students. See, we don't know who your students are. And
Right, but can you do it at the system level? Like, so we know what they are in 2020, then we'll know what they are in 2024 and 2028.
You will have voting rates for the students that are on your campus in those. Yes, we will do 20. Anybody who signs up new will get 2012, 2014, 2016, and 2018.
Okay.
And by the way, that is not going to happen much longer because the 2012 voting records are getting kind of messy. And, as people move around or states expunge the records and things like that, I'm not trusting them as much as I did. And so this will be, I think, I'm not positive, but I think it will be our last year of providing 2012 data. But yes, you will get multiple years. What you won't get is the same students tracked year.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. Thank you.
I want to just finish this up really quickly. We have lots of resources. I guess you know that. And now I'm going to kick it back to Nancy. And she's going to talk about other resources. And then what we'll do is open it up for questions. And I'm happy to go back to any slides that you need.
So thank you, Nancy. So as you can tell from this presentation, Nancy Thomas is one of the most enthusiastic and valuable players, I think, in this space. From my perspective, she's asking so many of the right questions. She picks up the phone every time you call her. I don't know how many people are going to be on the on the phone now, but this is important work, and it's not just important work; it's a passion. That being said, one of the things that happened when I started investigating this as a system, signing up as a system, as Nancy described, I looked, and we had, of our 12 institutions, about 8 of them had already signed up with NSLV independently. They were getting their reports. But the other 4 either didn't know about it or hadn't gotten around to it. So basically, I called up their presidents. I said, would you be okay if I signed you up for this? And I sent them an email. So I get an email back, and the president said, that's fine. And then I shot a note to the chancellor. I said, I'm going to sign everybody up for this. I'm going to be the signing agent. And he didn't say no. So I don't remember whether he responded or not, but he didn't say no. So I just signed everybody up, and I sent the form in. That means that all of our institutions now can get the reports that Nancy described. One of the interesting things that happened in my committee that works on voting and voter engagement is that in the last conference call, they were wondering when they were going to get the reports, and I explained that there's been a delay in getting the reports because not all the states have certified their elections. And one of the faculty members said, would it be okay if if you called us together and had a meeting, and if we could share our reports? We'd really like to see what's happening on everybody's campus. And I thought that was probably one of the most healthy responses to this kind of work, because we're all in this together, and it's not a competition as much as it is a learning opportunity for what people can help each other do given the situation that each of the campuses have. So I just wanted to sort of let you know that as systems, we have many resources that we don't necessarily tap. And I just wanted to give you a few examples from Maryland. At the University of Maryland, one of our professors in the politics department at College Park, Stella Rouse, wrote a book very recently called The Politics of Millennials. That book is so interesting. I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but the millennial generation is the most diverse cohort that we've ever had in the voter cohort. And how they behave and what they react to, Stella has studied that. And so she came to talk to, I used her as a guest speaker at one of our events because she was really knowledgeable and was able to address some questions that people had. Another example, Allison McCarthy, a faculty member at Towson University, wrote a very useful book, Teaching Civic Engagement Across the Curriculum. It has multiple chapters. People, many people in the student affairs offices are using it as guidelines for getting students engaged, but it's also just a valuable resource for faculty. Salisbury University, I don't know if Sarah's on the phone. She was one of the people that signed up on for the webinar. And if Sarah's here, you should say something. But Sarah Surak is the director of the Public Affairs and Civic Engagement Institute at Salisbury. And what they do is they help faculty members, they do professional development for faculty to help them have these difficult conversations, these controversial conversations, how to manage those. Many faculty members, I mean, if what Nancy said earlier is that if you have a lot of political conversation on your campus, more students will vote. But if faculty are afraid to have those, not just have those conversations, but manage those conversations, then we're losing an opportunity. So Sarah and her staff and the folks at Salisbury are doing professional development across the institution to help faculty deal with those questions. Bill Mandicott and I think Michael Mathias from Frostburg State may also be on the call, and if they are, I hope they identify themselves. They're working very hard on working with the 2020 census, because if you're not counted, you can't, we don't have voting capacity. So tying the census work with voter engagement is another thing that's going on in Maryland. So I wanted to call your attention to just give shout outs to these folks, but we have many other resources, and so do you. So with that, I think it's time to open it up for questions and comments. And Claire, I'll turn it over to you for managing those.
So if you have any questions, if you'd please type them into the chat box. We don't have any right now, so maybe
unmute and ask.
Well, we don't have any. We don't have most people on video, so it's a little hard to juggle people not talking over one another.
Yeah.
But if maybe you want to respond to Nancy Shapiro's thoughts while we give people a moment or two to formulate some questions.
So I do have a couple of things to add. One is Allison McCartney's book is really good, and I read it cover to cover, but true, full disclosure, we have 2 chapters in there, one on the classroom and one on campus climate. So that, but I think I really recommend that. Sarah's work on dialogue is very well known and a terrific example. I think that a lot of campuses ask me, how do we make the case for this? And the reason they ask is because political is scary. And right now, political and partisan are 2 terms that are being used interchangeably. And I am here to tell you, don't do that. They are not interchangeable terms. Voting is a bipartisan civil right, and it is not a partisan issue. If one party decides to make something an issue, that's their call, but that doesn't mean when we talk about it on our campus that it's partisan. It is not. The other thing is that politics, I think higher education has done a terrible disservice to this country and its role in democracy. Our democracy, I mean, how many of you think democracy is working exactly the way it should? And I'm going to guess that most of you would say not exactly the way it should, and a lot of you would probably say not very well at all. Well, voting is not the only form of engagement. It's not going to solve all of the problems of democracy, but it's an easy access point, and it's very fundamental. And thanks to NSLV, it actually can be measured objectively. We have no other measurements for civic engagement in higher education at this time that are objective measurements. So for that reason, it's really important. I will work on speaking engagements that are, somebody will call me up and say, will you come give a talk on free speech? Absolutely, because it's relevant to political discourse. Will you come give a talk on voting? Obviously, yes. Will you come give a talk on well-being and diversity? Yes, because I can connect all of those dots. They don't operate in a vacuum. You pay attention to voting, you pay attention to these other things. So I can help you make the case. I'm very happy to work with any campus to do that if you need it.
So we have
a couple, mostly these are logistic questions. So if people have signed up, when will they receive their reports? And then if people have not signed up, when can they sign up? Is it annual, or what's the annual or what's the regular window for signing up?
So smart, because those were two things that I forgot to mention, didn't I? Yes, okay, so let's talk first about when to sign up. So we operate, as you heard, on actual voting records, and we are at the mercy of when those records are certified by secretaries of state and sent in and compiled. And as I said, we work with Catalyst. There are other vendors, but Catalyst has not received all of the voting records yet. They were supposed to come in 4 to 6 weeks ago. And so what that meant is that we shut down the time period for us to accept the forms. And we did that because we thought the voting records were going to be ready and we wanted to move ahead quickly. Instead, the voting records aren't available, and therefore you still have a really, really little narrow window to submit a form to get it into this batch, and that is literally by noon tomorrow. I know, I'm sorry, that's really painful, but everybody's asking for the reports, and we do think records are going to be done next week, and so we need to hit the ground running. We send to the clearinghouse a list of campuses. They then prepare the student file, and that takes them about 2 weeks. So if the voting records are available next week, we're still already a little bit late. If you do not sign up by noon tomorrow, I don't know when you'll get your reports. I would certainly sign up, and if we get a critical mass of campuses, we might be able to raise the money to run another match this year. The problem is it's expensive, and we don't have it. So if we had the money, we could run the match. So I encourage you to sign up even if you can't get your form in tomorrow. But seriously, keep in mind that 2012 problem.
I have a question, Nancy. What about the 2020 election?
Right. Yes. And up is in for 5 years.
Okay.
So you'll get 2020, and that'll come out in 2021 in the same way that ours does. It's usually about 7 months after an election, unfortunately. And then there was another question, something about when do you get the forms in and
when will they get their reports? But I think maybe people were wondering if they were interested in signing up for the 2020 election, when is your next deadline? Maybe not trying to, that's great if someone can catch up with the last deadline, more power to you if you can get that in by noon tomorrow. But
yeah.
Let's say they can't, what's sort of your cycle if someone's trying to get on the 2020 cycle?
Yeah, on the 2020, well, it would be probably March of 2021. You know, that would be the deadline. I wouldn't wait. And as I say, what we might do is if we get a critical mass of campuses, we might run 2018 again. And then what you would get is 2012, 2014, 2016, and 2018. You can sign up for 2020, but if you don't have 2012 and 2016, you don't really have that baseline that you're trying to beat. So it's really smart to get into the study in a timely way so that we can give you your data and you can use it.
Okay. Then we have one more question. Let's take this since on the same topic. So can you clarify, does signing up mean schools who have never received a report before? If someone's already been in the process, do they have to, re-sign up? What's that process?
So our authorization forms last 5 years. They expired in August of 2018. We've literally spent 1.5 years trying to get new forms. I can't tell you how crazy it is, but we have been trying to get new forms. So we had 1,100 and some change in the first 5 years. 965 of them re-signed. We have about 100 that didn't. And so you may be one of those campuses that didn't reauthorize. get your form in, because you won't get 2018 data. So everybody, even if they were in the study before, has to reauthorize. If you go to the website, the NSLV website, you'll see a link to you can even put it in, participating NSLV campuses, and you'll come right up to that page, and there's a little button that you push and you can enter the name of your campus, and it will tell you if you've ever been in the study, if you have reauthorized, and if you don't see a check mark under yes, you've reauthorized, then you won't get a report. If you've never been in the study, you'll still be under the kind of the reauthorized.
Okay, great. So go to the website, enter in your campus, see where you stand. Switching gears just slightly, someone's curious to know if students are made aware that their voting records are being anonymously tracked.
Are students aware? Well, their voting records are public records. All of our voting records are public records. And like I said, we don't track. We can't track. That's exactly what we cannot do. We can do a snapshot based on an enrollment list for one semester, but we do not track students. So no, I doubt they're aware. Well, a lot of students are aware because a lot of students are using their NSLV reports, but it would be a mischaracterization to say, do they know that their voting records are being tracked? They are not being tracked. All voting records are a matter of public record. How you voted is not. So if you voted for Bill Clinton, way back, or you voted for Hillary and Trump, that is not a matter of public record. We don't know it. Nobody knows it. But whether or not you showed up, that's public record.
That clarified it for the question seeker. So if anyone else has questions, if you would enter them in. And then I thought, could you go back to the slide that showed your recommendations, or maybe it was a gathering of things that campuses who have higher participation do, if that makes sense, what I'm asking.
Oh, this one? This one?
That one.
Yes. So I thought this had some tie-ins to the work of the TS3 network. And while we wait for questions, maybe you could give us some additional thoughts on this, or maybe either Nancy or maybe people in the audience did, of how to make this more tangible, or how to take the report and turn it into practice, because I know that that's always the interest, right? This is great data, this is great information, and now what do I do?
Yeah, so this morning I got a call from Macalester College, and a professor had his entire class in the room for the day working on their NSLV report, and also looking at voting records, looking at polling locations, and I think it might have been a stats class, or it might have been a poli-sci class, but they had a bunch of questions about the NSLV report, and they randomly just called me, and I was able to answer it. A lot of campuses are, obviously if you get an NSLV report, we hope you use it, and most of the campuses I think at this point are. Lots of times they go to faculty so that they can see which fields of study are participating at which rates. Certainly they go to coalitions or student groups that are mobilizing voters. I think that they usually go to centers and offices for civic engagement, and they go over to political science offices. So people are using these reports all over. We talked to one campus that had taken the NSLV report and election imperatives, our set of recommendations, and they had convened around it for a full day of retreat for the entire campus, which was really cool. And I think maybe they connected it somehow with Voter Registration Day or Constitution Day, but they had a day of discussions about political issues and so forth. So one of the things that I always tell everybody is that I personally am less interested in whether your students vote. I'm more interested in which of your students vote, because I think it's really important for us to close the equity gaps. And one thing about these reports is you can see which groups are not voting at equal rates. Colleges and universities are supposed to be the great equalizers, and there is nothing more important than to equalize power, access to systems, ability to navigate communities, ability to have a say in what happens in your community, in your state, and in your region. So this document can be very empowering and help institutions empower students too.
And I would just add, with respect to Claire's question about the TS3, the list here is really a good example of the high impact practices that we know give students a connection to the university and success. So the more we engage students in things that are important and important to them, the better results we'll get for student success. So I think that it is directly related. I think there's a real direct connection. I think there were a couple of other questions.
Yeah. There was one more logistical question, but yes, I have to say, Nancy Shapiro, that's exactly, I was, sitting here and listening, and you had a lot of sign up information and interesting information, and all of a sudden you got to the slide and I thought, well, that list sounds awfully familiar, and I'm sure we have a lot of people in our TS3 network and our TS3 HIPS network who would be really interested in that slide. And the report you mentioned you had a report. So if you wanted to send that, okay, that's the report, everyone. And then if you wanted to send a link to that, perhaps we can circulate that when we circulate the recording, because there are always more people who watch this after the fact than could join us. So I think that report would be a lot of interest. So the logistical question is, you talked about how campuses find out if they're signed up, how they sign up. How do they find out who on campus helps them sign up? So do you have a list of who the campus point of contact is? And that's the first question.
So this was, I didn't do it all perfectly from the get-go. And this is one of the big mistakes that I made, is I said we're going to send the reports to one individual and that individual would remain confidential. That meant we got endless emails saying, how do we find the report? So we ended up creating this system where, you send us an email, we send it to the person who's got the report, we plead with them, we beg, we cajole. Not doing it anymore. That's why on these sign-up forms, 3 people get the report. The president, the Office of Institutional Research, and one other person of the institution's choosing. So from this point forward, you may go to the president's office or the Office of Institutional Research, and at least in theory, they will have your NSLV reports, and we don't have to be chasing them down for you. I'm sorry if that inconvenienced people. When we first started this study, it was just me, and everybody was so afraid of it. They were so afraid, and I had to make all these promises. Oh, your data will be confidential. Oh, we'll only send it to one person. I promise we'll never share it on that. No. And we keep all of those promises, but the one about not sharing who has the reports ended up being a little bit of a nightmare.
And then how do they find out? So if this individual is interested in getting their campus signed up, how do they know who on campus to go to?
Yeah.
That same list of people?
Yep, that's that list of, I think I'm going the wrong way here, sorry. It's the list of signatories. So president, IR director, any vice president, any associate vice president, the registrar could sign up. I will tell you, registrars don't like to do this, so I wouldn't try them at first. Your provost or dean of the college, anybody who looks pretty senior can sign up. What can't sign up are things like the director of the Institute for Democracy in Higher Education. I cannot sign up to us.
Right. I would say that if you're looking to do it, the Student Affairs Office and the Academic Affairs Office are the 2 places you'd go first.
Yeah.
If they haven't heard about it, if they need more information about it, that's when Nancy and her team will describe what it is and what they're signing up for. Or given that these are NASH connections, they can call me, they can contact Rebecca at NASH, and she can help them decide or figure out how to go about it. So you have resources. And on your campus, start with student affairs and academic affairs and say, have you ever heard of NSLV? Are we members? Do we belong? What do we think this is a good idea for these reasons.
Yeah, and if tomorrow morning, and only one signature, right? We don't need 3 signatures, we just need 1. But if you go in and the person says, I'm really interested in this, but I can't look at it until 2 o'clock, or I can't look at it until Friday morning, just let me know. We're delayed so much if I have to push it back, but I really need to know that people are so close. We're really sure we're going to get this form. So I will do that.
I mean, just for context so that folks know, one of the reasons that NSLV is delayed in this is that states like Georgia haven't certified their election yet. There have been protests about whether or not the results are the final results, and there's lawsuits, and so they have to wait. This is very unusual, or has been up until now has been unusual. But so when there are delays at the state level and they're not releasing the data, then everything, the train stops. So that's sort of the kind of glitches that they're dealing with.
And my dean, who is the most impatient person really, he keeps coming to me and saying, why can't you run the Georgia campuses? Or why can't you run the Massachusetts campuses now? Massachusetts has certified its records. Well, the reason we can't is because of the out-of-state students.
Right.
We find them.
It's 4 p.m., so we don't want to go over, but we want to thank both Nancy Thomas and Nancy Shapiro for sharing information about this. From all of the questions about signing up or re-signing up or getting reports, it looks like there's some people who are interested in pursuing this, which is great. Nancy Thomas, I thought maybe while we just close out, if you could type your website into the, and maybe your email into the chat box, just so we can be sure everyone has that. And I didn't want to,
Yeah.
If you do that.
I will do that, but it's really easy. Literally, if you plug in NSLVE, it will come up. And I didn't pay any money for that to happen. It just happens. I don't have.
It's at the bottom. Your chat box is at the bottom.
If you go to, and I just thought, you mentioned a couple of times if people needed to email you, this way we would know that they could do that.
Yeah.
So we'll wait 1 or 2 minutes for that. But in the meantime, thanks everyone for joining us. We hope that you either are able to join the study by some miracle tomorrow or for 2020, or you're able to make use of these reports. Now you know how to find them and draw some great connections to the TS3 HIPS work or other work that you're doing on campus. Look forward to seeing those connections. And there is the website, and the email is coming up. So thanks again to the Nancys and to everyone for joining us.
Thank
Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
you. See.